to us. So this is intended to be a community discussion. We want to hear from you. Please send us your questions in the chat throughout the call. You can raise your hand if you want to ask a question. You can just dive right in and take yourself off mute. Please mute yourself when you're not speaking. The meeting is recorded and shared on our YouTube channel, and we also share the link to the meeting out to attendees afterward. At the end of the meeting, there will be a short survey that'll pop up in the chat at the very end. I think on the screen it'll pop up, and we'll ask your feedback to hear what you thought about today's discussion. If you have any feedback for us, if there are topics that you would like to discuss in the future. The purpose of our Wisdom Monthly Community Forum is to move together toward equity and better outcomes in breast cancer for all. So these monthly forums, they happen generally the last Monday of each month. Sometimes we have to adjust that schedule for holidays. They are from 4 to 5 p.m. Pacific, and the intention is to have an open community discussion. Usually we choose a topic that has been brought to us by members or attendees, a topic related to breast cancer risk, breast cancer prevention, and then we'll get subject matter experts on the topic to discuss the latest in science and breakthroughs and technologies. We also sometimes will have conversations focused on wisdom study participant experiences or breast cancer patients experiences or advocacy. Community organizations will sometimes present at these forums. So they're really a way to hear what's going on real time in this space. What we've discussed in prior forums, we've had some really incredible topics and speakers around personalized breast cancer risk assessment, breast cancer in the Black African American community. We've talked about different risk factors for breast cancer, breast density. We've talked a lot about the genetics of breast cancer, clinical trials, breast cancer across the lifespan. We've talked several times about menopause and hormone therapy for breast cancer risk and how to mitigate risk of hormone therapies and what it looks like now today. We've talked about some aspects of the study itself, like we have a breast health decisions tool that we offer our participants. It's an educational tool. We've talked about that. Artificial intelligence, conferences, pregnancy and breast cancer risk. And today, what we're going to be talking about is the risk assessment tool used by the Wisdom Study. So that's our tool that our scientists have worked together to create, and it's what we use to predict participants' chances of developing breast cancer. And we've made updates to this tool, and we wanted to talk about the updates that we've made over time and how they could change one of our participants' experiences in the study if they participated, if they've been in the study for 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and how your screening recommendations in the study may be different now than they were 5 years ago. And we also want to give a sneak peek into what's to come in the future of the Wisdom Study and the continuation of the updates that we're planning already for the future. It's all pretty exciting stuff. So today, our conversation, it's going to be more of a fireside chat style conversation where Wisdom's founder, Dr. Esserman, is going to facilitate a conversation about the Wisdom's risk models. And we're going to be joined with 2 Wisdom scientists. We're very, very lucky to have this incredible team of subject matter experts. Dr. Shieh is joining us tonight from New York City. He's an internist and cancer research at Weill Cornell Medicine. Dr. Shieh is a clinician and also has an active research program in cancer epidemiology. He is studying how to make cancer screening safer and more effective by tailoring it to an individual's risk profile. He's a researcher on the wisdom study. His research focuses on developing risk models and genetic tests that are used to estimate breast cancer risk. He earned his medical degree from UCSF School of Medicine and completed his residency in internal medicine and primary care at the Hospital of the University of Pennsylvania. We also have Dr. Elad Ziv tuning in tonight from San Francisco. He's a wisdom researcher and a primary care doctor and specialist in internal medicine, cancer researcher at UCSF. His research focuses on the genetic epidemiology, so how inherited factors play a role in disease of breast cancer and other age-related diseases. He also studies groups of mixed ethnicity to understand the relationship between environmental and genetic risk factors in explaining differences in cancer incidence. He also got his medical degree and completed residency in internal medicine at UCSF. So we're really pleased to have these panelists tonight.
Okay.
Dr. Esserman.
Okay.
Leave it up
Thanks,
to you.
Steph.
Sure, my pleasure.
Can you guys hear me? So I wanted to make this conversational so that people could ask questions and be able to sort of weigh in. And, so the whole big group of us have been working on this now for a long time. And actually, Yue was on the faculty here when we first started Wisdom. But so maybe let's kind of roll back and sort of talk about, you know, when we first started the wisdom study and decided that we were going to try and use genetics as a tool to try and help understand risk. Maybe I can start first with you a lot as and say, what were the tools that we really had available at the time?
So, thank you. Yeah, it's kind of been a really interesting road, and it's still evolving. So I'm really happy to be here and talk about this, and also hear from the community. The two main tools are, I would say, the kind of standard tools that we think of when we think of genetics, which is understanding the high and intermediate penetrance genes, such as many of you have probably heard about BRCA1 and BRCA2, but there are a handful of other genes like that. So we have those, and I think Wisdom was really forward thinking in incorporating those genes into really a population-based screening. And then we also had an emerging technology to understand genetic risk using polygenic risk. And this is a term that maybe some people have heard, but I'm guessing many people haven't heard, so I'll try and define it. So polygenic risk is really the idea of genetic variants that are common in the general population. And so many people share them, and each one individually raises cancer risk very little, but there are hundreds that we know about. When we started, we knew about 70 or so, 75 or so, but since then we've gotten many more. And putting people on a spectrum of how many of the risk variants they inherited is also informative for risk. That's the idea of polygenic risk. That's termed SNPs, or single nucleotide polymorphisms. And we implemented a polygenic risk score for women in the trial, in the first version of the trial. And over time, this polygenic risk score has evolved because just more genetic discoveries have been made. And in order to adapt to that, we've had to dramatically change kind of the workflow that we have. And so as you can see on the slide in Wisdom 2.0, we're able to test for millions of polymorphisms. And out of these, we can use hundreds to thousands to assess women's breast cancer risk and to classify women along the continuum of risk, and then make decisions about how to screen best based on that.
Yeah, thanks so much a lot. So anyway, I think, and even though the tools have changed, right? So, there are more genes we can look at, there's, more complexity in the polygenic risk. The sort of the basic way we think about assigning risk has not changed, right? And so we're still trying to think about sort of buckets of risk, or like 4 categories of risk. And you were the first to sort of write that up, and that the tools we're using to get to that have changed, but that approach hasn't changed. So can you tell us a little bit about how we came to that kind of don't screen till you're 50, or every year, once every other year, every year, and every 6 months? What's the engine behind that, or why are we thinking about it in that way? Is Iwei on?
We can't hear you.
Iwei, you're on mute.
Is this better?
Yeah, there you go.
I'm sorry, my microphone was not set up correctly.
That's not the right slide.
Happens to everyone, I guess. So yeah, thank you for having me. Yeah, so just diving right in. So yeah, in the concept of in the framework of Wisdom 1.0, I think we came at it with a few principles. I think one is we try to use the evidence, so the kind of medical literature when we could, to inform how we place women in these different screening recommendation buckets. And second, in the general scheme of like safety, we also pledge not to screen less aggressively than any current breast cancer guideline in existence at that time. And as many of you know, the guidelines were and still are kind of a morass of differing opinions on when to start, how often to screen, when to stop, et cetera. And we, again, decided not to go outside the bounds of that. But for example, for women 40 to 49, where there was a lot of controversy around when to actually start, with some guidelines saying 40, others saying 45, others saying 50. Again, this is back in 2016. We kind of just said, if you're 40 to 49, there's active controversy. We'll use the polygenic risk score that Alad had mentioned, couple that together with kind of a risk model that takes into account kind of your characteristics, how old you are, your self-reported race, ethnicity, family history, et cetera. And if your risk is equal to or greater than a 50-year-old woman, where all the guidelines agree that you should be screened, we recommended screening. And if your risk was not there yet, we reassessed your risk every year. So we delivered a new questionnaire where you had the chance to report new risk factors, and obviously aging slightly increases the risk just because breast cancer, incidence goes up with age. And whenever you hit that threshold, we recommended screening. And then the latest was 50. So then you're kind of in lockstep with everyone. So that's kind of how we came up with one of the major decisions around first when to start screening. In terms of decisions on how often to screen, we had found pretty convincing reports from very large studies showing that, for example, if you had very high breast density, so the highest category of density, so extremely dense, and you were 40 to 49, that those women had a higher risk of getting advanced breast cancer, so higher stage or more widespread breast cancer, if we screened every 2 years versus 1. And so for us, that was an impetus to at least assign women 40 to 49 with extremely dense breasts into annual screening. And then from there, we made cutoffs in terms of, kind of just percentile risks to also determine who should be getting annual screening. And we tried to frame that in terms of your risk compared to women your age. Again, risk kind of goes up as we age for many diseases. And we didn't just want the oldest women to be automatically characterized as highest risk. Again, it's relative. And so we, again, kind of did a bit of a comparison, and we kind of took the top 2.5th percentile by age as a marker for annual screening. And then I think, yeah, for those variants that we know about, like BRCA1 and 2, that do confer very high risk, those were, kind of clear cut that these people need annual mammography plus MRI, and that's kind of how the medical community deals with those women at the highest risk buckets. And so we also came up with absolute risk thresholds, so kind of 5 or 10-year risk predicted by the risk models and the polygenic risk scores that were in that same, galaxy of magnitude, and those women were also recommended for MRI and mammography.
So anyway, I would say that, so it wasn't even, I mean, yes, the BRCA carriers and so on have higher risk, but they're probably also at risk for faster growing tumors, right?
Correct.
And so
Yeah,
that helps us. So our decisions about, is it okay? I think people get confused about, oh, if I have a high risk, does that necessarily mean I have to be screened every 6 years? I mean, every 6 months, or really, maybe I have higher risk, but the frequent screening isn't going to be the answer necessarily.
correct. Yeah, and I think that's always been like a big need. Like if we had a Wisdom 1.0 wish list, I think the number one on the wish list had always been not just what's your overall risk, but what type of cancer are you at risk of developing? As many of you know, the majority of breast cancers are they respond to hormones. They're hormone receptor positive, slightly lower grade, and many of these cancers are quite treatable. Our treatment has really gotten better, and a lot of people don't realize that as treatments get better, the window for screening to make a difference actually gets slower and slower, because it kind of doesn't matter as much whether you found that cancer in 2025 or 26 or 27. The treatments would work, equally well. But I think it became clear that, if we were able to find those women or predict those women at risk of developing the faster growing cancers, those cases are where there is a window of opportunity for early detection to really intercept a cancer before it really kind of takes off and grows and spreads. And those are, the cases where we feel screening can make the most difference.
Great. So
and-
Elad,
yeah.
what about um, what about what about ancestries? Like, why does that really matter? And are we, in the trial, we ask people to identify themselves by their race, and that's sort of what we used early on. But is that the best way to do things? And why does it actually matter?
Yeah, so thank you. That's a good question. So we early in the trial, actually in the Wisdom 1.0 trial, we asked for race and ethnicity, and we still ask for race and ethnicity. We think that's important. But from the genetic perspective, we could potentially also use ancestry. And the newer version of the genotyping that we're using will allow us to infer ancestry. And then the question is, why does it matter? In some cases, it may matter because the SNPs, or single nucleotide polymorphisms, are only either present in one population, or their importance varies depending on which ancestry you're from. And so that is something that we are implementing as part of the Wisdom 2.0, is inference of the ancestry for each woman. We still want the race and ethnicity information, because that is also important separately from ancestry. But we are shifting over to using polygenic risk scores that are more tailored to ancestry, and also using the genetic data to infer the ancestry, if that makes sense. I'm happy to take more questions about that, because that maybe isn't.
Well, I think there are, certain types of these polygenic risk scores that actually predict for slower growing or hormone positive cancers,
Right.
right? And where do we find those? How, in what populations were those developed?
Right. So yeah. So the first I would say that the earliest studies and the biggest studies to date that have identified the SNPs for polygenic risk scores were done in European populations, actually, not even European American, but European, like in Europe, and that those polygenic risk scores don't always work as well when they're translated to populations of other ancestries. And one of the populations where they haven't worked is populations of African ancestry. They work a little bit, but they don't work as well as they do when trying them in other populations of European ancestry. So we've partnered with a group in Chicago that's led some of the largest genetic studies in African ancestry populations, both African Americans, and they've included populations from West Africa and from the Caribbean. They've done, I think, to date, over 15,000 cases and equal number of controls. And they're developing newer polygenic risk scores. And several things came out of their studies that I think are important. One of them is that they can predict a subtype of breast cancer called triple negative breast cancer fairly well. That is important because that subtype is more common in populations of West African ancestry than they are in either European or Asian or other ancestries. And so the fact that they are now able to predict that subtype well in that population means that we can now, applying their models, predict it well in the wisdom trial participants. And that will be, I think, of great help to our participants because we can predict that this very aggressive subtype of breast cancer.
So, Yue, one of the things, and both of you, I think one of the things that often causes confusion is we might say that someone has higher risk. Maybe we have them screened in the moderate risk category, or maybe their risk is high, but not quite high enough to meet the 1-year screening. But then we might still say, well, maybe you should be thinking about prevention or reducing your risk. And how that's often very hard for people to understand. So how do we, where we might say, oh, well, you ought to think about risk reduction, but in fact, we're not screening them every 6 months, or, how does that, how can we help make sense of that for people?
Yeah, I think that, yeah, it can definitely be seen as confusing, but I think that plays into what I was trying to get across earlier, that there's a risk of getting breast cancer overall, but then, we always say in the medical research community, breast cancer is actually not one disease, it's many diseases. And kind of we sometimes have these diagrams of like different animals where some of them are turtles and snails where they grow more slowly, whereas others are hummingbirds and they really take off and spread quickly. And again, the goal for screening is to make a difference in the faster growing cancers. The kind of slower growing ones, it's still breast cancer, yes, but the thought is that perhaps screening will do less of a benefit because these cancers are treatable anyway. And since no one wants to get breast cancer, I think if someone is at high risk of what we think is a slower growing cancer, the best, medicine, so to speak, is actually preventing that cancer. So doing endocrine risk reduction. And so again, it's really thinking about, we have all these different tools in our armamentarium. What is screening best suited for? What is, endocrine risk reduction like tamoxifen or aromatase inhibitors best for? And really just tailoring it to that type of cancer that we think is most likely to develop.
Yeah, and I think that the one that predicts for the slower growing hormone positive, this is something that could be very helpful. And we do have tools that are much better tolerated, like baby TAM, getting people to exercise more, those kind of, you can't change your genetics. You can't change when your periods were started. Although you could probably change that for your kids by making sure they're extremely physically active when they're young, or very physically active when they're young. But those are things you can't change. But there are things that you can change, and that's one of the things that we want. One of the things that we're particularly interested in is trying to, someone who was on Wisdom told me that when she filled in her annual survey, she was noticed that her weight had gone up and her exercise had gone down, and that got her all motivated, and she lost 10 pounds and doubled her exercise. So I thought that was really great. So one of the things I'd love to do is try to figure out how we can capture all the steps taken by women of wisdom. And thought that could be a very fun thing for everybody to do. It's just a good way of making people aware. Okay, well, maybe I'll ask each of you a little bit about, what are some of the things. So, what are the things in Wisdom 2.0? And maybe we can put up a slide about what's different in 2.0. And, Alad, what are the things that you're most excited about? And then I'll ask Iwe the same.
Yeah, I think the thing we're most excited about is implementing newer polygenic risk scores. We have, I think the slide actually, it's 19 or actually closer to 20 million single nucleotide polymorphisms. Of course, not all of them are important for risk, but we can now use polygenic risk scores that have thousands of polymorphisms, and we can make those polygenic risk scores much more accurate by ancestry. And then we can also make those polygenic risk scores for different diseases, different subtypes of breast cancer. And so I think from a genetics perspective, that to me is a substantial gain. And that we will be able to not only have we already started implementing that, but the accuracy should get better as larger breast cancer studies come in. There's one that's going to come in sometime in the next year, a larger genetic study that will include several 100,000 women with breast cancer of all ancestries. And so when we get those results, and we're working with the groups that are running those analyses, then we'll have even better polygenic risk scores. So for me, that is super exciting to be able to implement that immediately into Wisdom.
Well, Iwe, before you answer, I'll let you answer this next question because I know it's this topic near and dear to your heart. So Linda Crossley asked, where mammograms are less effective as a screening tool, like in dense breast tissue, where might ultrasound AI come into play?
Yeah, I think certainly AI is making lots of inroads in various aspects of risk prediction and, imaging, so helping radiologists find tumors. To be quite blunt, we as a wisdom study team are not super, optimistic in terms of ultrasound as having staying power in the screening world. I think it's being offered now because we don't really have anything that's scalable that we can offer women with dense breasts. But really, it hasn't really been shown to improve any meaningful outcomes and actually leads to a high rate of false positives and unnecessary biopsies and procedures. I think where the imaging that we are excited about is something called contrast enhanced mammography, where it still relies on the same kind of X-ray technology as mammograms, but there is some IV contrast that's given at the same time, and that can give a much clearer view of and improve the sensitivity of the mammogram. And also, unlike MRI, which is extremely expensive and has very few centers that offer that, contrast enhanced mammography kind of has that ability to be scaled up and kind of really offered to those women with the dense breasts that may need more supplemental screening. I think the role of AI itself is a much bigger conversation. Like I said, it's currently being offered as a way to help radiologists find cancers that may be there on an image. But where we're really thinking about AI is in terms of using AI on an ostensibly normal mammogram to say, hey, what's this woman's risk of getting breast cancer 5, 10 years down the line? And there's been some exciting studies in the area. Still a lot of science left to do, but I think there's definitely the potential shown for AI to improve our ability to predict risk on top of these different tools that we talk about here, like a woman's personal characteristics and their genetics. I think these are all pieces of a puzzle, and I think AI, we call mammographic AI, so shown here on the bottom is potentially the next big kind of thing in our armamentarium to predict risk.
Yeah, and well, and then what's exciting about that, instead of, 50% of women or about have dense breast tissue, depending on the age group, and it's not actually that helpful to have to make everybody do extra things just because their tissue is denser. But who's the group of people so that really need something more? And that might be the people with densest breast tissue, maybe that's 10 or 15%, but also mammographic AI can find that 10% of people who truly have risk. It's pretty exciting, actually, to see something like that happen. It's also really nice to know that you don't necessarily have that bigger risk. That's a big thing. I would also say that there was a recent big study that came out of the United Kingdom, out of the UK, that showed that contrast enhanced mammography and MRI really did about the same in these high-risk people. And a good way to think about it is the way you're looking for things. If you have dense breast tissue, what you're looking for is something that is a cancer or where it's denser. And if you're the denser the tissue you have, is the harder it is to have some kind of X-ray or sound wave differentiate the tumor from your normal tissue. But by giving a contrast material through the veins, you're actually looking at the blood supply and how that's taken up. And that's why IV contrast mammography or IV contrast delivered for an MRI is why that's different. Those two things are different. And ultrasound is also, it's not an X-ray, but it's a sound wave. So in that denser breast tissue, it's just not going to perform as well as some kind of IV contrast. And that's why if you really have risk, you want to have the more appropriate test. What about Yiwei, the ability to look at combinations of AI and polygenic risk to predict what kind of cancer you might have, fast or slow growing? What's the promise there?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question. And luckily, we, as a wisdom study team, just got funded from the National Institutes of Health to study this exact question. And this is research being led by colleagues at Kaiser Permanente, Northern California, where they do have the ability for, I don't know, tens of thousands of women, potentially reaching hundreds of thousands, to look at their mammography images, to run these AI algorithms, to look at the risk scores, and then see how well they perform. Again, not just how predicting whether someone develops breast cancer down the line, but how well they work in terms of faster and slower growing cancers. And with that amount of data, they also potentially have the opportunity to train these AI algorithms to kind of learn, these patterns for faster and slower. And so, the kind of moonshot or the big, goal that we have is to train Mammo AI to predict fast versus slow growing cancers, and then allow us to couple that with genetic, polygenic risk scores that also are tuned to fast versus slow. And again, kind of be able to now offer screening really guided by this kind of overall assessment of your fast growing cancer risk.
Yeah, it's very exciting. We're actually having big plans. We're putting in this PRS for triple negative breast cancer risk prediction now. That's also maybe Elad, you might want to talk a little bit about that. So we've talked about this for, gosh, I don't know, 9 years. Pretty exciting to say, can we specifically screen for somebody's risk for this aggressive cancer? Is that possible?
Yeah, I mean, the answer is that it's increasingly possible. that we do have polygenic risk scores for triple negative breast cancer, and we can facilitate them being more ancestry specific with the newer kind of data that we're getting. And so we have moved to implement these, and that's sort of close to being ready to implement. And the idea is then we also figured out that above a certain threshold, we will now identify a newer class of women that we're going to be screening more frequently. And also because triple negative breast cancer tends to happen even more so in younger women, with the adoption in Wisdom of screening or considering screening for women in their 30s now with genetics, we will also be implementing not just all polygenic risk scores, but polygenic risk scores for triple negative breast cancer in younger women as well. And the women at the very highest end of the distribution will be recommended to have every 6 months screening, and women at the higher distribution will also will recommend annual mammography for those women as well.
Yeah, and I think maybe Elijah, you might, or Yue, one of you might want to talk about what sort of prompted us to lower, why are we encouraging women to get their genetic testing at 30? I mean, what sort of led to that?
Yeah, so I mean, I think several things. One is obviously the genetics is something you're born with, so it doesn't change. And so getting the information earlier is probably useful. But the other thing that we found, I don't know if this is what you're alluding to, Laura, is that we had a pretty high rate of women in the trial who were carriers of BRCA1 and BRCA2 or PALB2, CHEK2, ATM mutations. So these are breast cancer genes that are tested typically in either the setting of women who already have breast cancer or women who have a strong family history. And what we found in the trial is that we had a lot of women who came in and did have carry one of these variants. Also, people call them mutations or pathogenic variants. Women carried these variants and didn't actually have a family history. So that's possibly because it was their male relatives who carried those and weren't affected. But for whatever reason, there were enough of them. It wasn't most, it was about, I think, 3% or something like that. But it was enough women that we thought that it would be better for those women to know about that in their 30s when we can be preventing breast cancer earlier or detecting breast cancer in these high-risk women earlier.
Right. And so there's a question in the chat, and we'd love to take questions now from people because, yeah, well, I think it's a good time to just make sure that you guys are understanding what we're doing. And I'll talk a little bit about our transition to inviting everybody to Wisdom 2.0. So we are, we are planning on probably inviting we have to do it in stages just so that we're not overwhelmed and color isn't overwhelmed and our ability to turn everything around more quickly. I think that we will be probably inviting most people towards at the very end of the year. We are working now on getting these new tools in, including learning how to integrate the mammographic AI assessments and getting the PRS for triple negative cancers in. Then we'll try and get everybody else in so we can update the risk assessments, and then we can start applying probably the mammographic AI models about middle of next year. So it's very exciting because this is an ongoing kind of living study, which is good. But I noticed, Jennifer, you put in that you had a higher risk. I think one of the things to think about, and I think this is really important, is that if you've been told that you have higher risk and that that you might benefit from risk reduction, I think one of the things you want to be careful about is not doing something that might increase your risk. And hormone replacement therapy with progesterone will do that, and it will make a bigger difference for you if you do have higher risk. Now, there are things that you can take that probably would not increase your risk, something like Duvet, which has a really powerful risk-reducing medicine in it, and just a little bit of estradiol and no progesterone. So I think it's important, half the reason why we want people to know their risk is so they can make better choices about what things they might do, like hormone replacement. I don't know if Yue or Elad, you want to make a comment about that?
No, I just put the name of it in the chat.
Okay,
Because
great.
I know these spellings are wonky, so.
Yeah, they are.
I mean, I think if the question is for updating polygenic risk scores, we will do it as sort of as women come in. I think that it's hard for me to know for each woman kind of when we're inviting women to re-enroll, but we will be doing it soon, I think, and that so I would expect that the newer polygenic risk score that you're going to get is going to be more accurate based on more data, and maybe we can hold one of these when we've already implemented some of the updates, but we will be probably implementing a bigger update in probably 2026. So we can announce that at that time. I think obviously deciding on risk reduction medication is going to be an individualized decision. Talk to the breast health specialist and to your doctor as well.
Right. It's not, again, it's not something anybody has to do, but it's something you can do. It's just like, taking a statin to reduce your heart disease risk and chance of getting a stroke. It's not something you have to do, but it's something that you can do that might make a big difference in your life. And now that we have something like baby Tam, it's much, much better tolerated. And there are going to be new things coming down the pike. And I think it's really important. We're really excited about trying to get more, more options for people. And I do know that there's all this on social media that everyone should be on hormone replacement. That's never true because everybody is different. People have different risks and benefits for doing things, and there's different types of things that you can use. And, knowing your breast cancer risk is super important because we have lots and lots of data from a huge study, the Women's Health Initiative, it's like 100,000 women. We don't throw all that away. And there are alternatives, like the Duvet that won't increase your risk. And, that's the whole point of knowing your risk is so that you can make better choices. I appreciate, Jennifer, that you're writing that that hormone therapy is having a hot moment right now. And everyone seems to be A-okay. It's so funny that people say, oh, you're going to prevent Alzheimer's, but there's no such data that estrogen reduces the risk of Alzheimer's. If anything, there's data the other way. And there's no intervention that's perfect. And, it's very different if you go into menopause at 35 than if you go into menopause at 52 and how much benefit you get from hormone therapy. And, in these studies, estrogen wasn't stopped. The estrogen alone arm was stopped because of increased heart disease risk in women in their 60s. So, and more so it's complicated, right? And there's no easy answer, but I think, there are lots of things you can do if you have vaginal dryness or, discomfort with having sex, or you have, there are things to do that you can, local estrogen works incredibly well. If you're having hot flashes, there's a whole new type of medicines called these neurokinins that like Veoza, and there's another one coming out that works super well. Or if there's another reason, if you were a BRCA carrier and had your ovaries out when you're 35, or you had triple negative cancer and chemo made you, go into menopause, you can have hormone replacement. That's not a problem. So everything is different, and it's a complicated decision, right? And so I think that's really, really important. That's one of the reasons why we want to say that personalized screening and personalized information about your risk helps you make better choices and better decisions. So I think that's super important. Um, um, other questions, let's see. Yeah, so Robin, you asked, what about women who don't know their genetic family history? Wisdom's the perfect trial for that because we can determine it, right?
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I wouldn't say that in Wisdom we're replacing family history, in the sense that we still use the family history for women who we do know about it in addition to their everything else. But we can do a lot of genetics without knowing your family history. So
Right.
I think we can give you a lot of information that
And if you actually
replaces
know
some
that
of it.
right, and if you know you have a mutation carrier in your family, and that's what caused the cancers, if you are screened and you don't have that genetic mutation, you don't have that risk. That's a true negative. That's the lingo we use. But that can be super helpful, and it can really take the weight of worrying so much about it off your shoulders. Well, Ashley asked about earlier genetic testing. Maybe, Steph, it might be worth putting up those scenarios. We have 3 examples, or 3 or 4 examples of women in their 30s and sort of why we're kind of doing that. So this is, someone, Jessica had a sister who was just diagnosed with breast cancer, and she was worried because she's Black, she should start earlier. And so she was screened and was found to have a PALB2 mutation, which meant she was in that very high risk group of women. And that helped us to recommend that she get screened every 6 months. And we can provide genetic counseling to help her understand the risk. And this is one of the reasons why we want to find people with genetic mutations when they're younger, is that the whole time period of when you get cancer is shifted earlier when you have one of these mutations. So instead of in your late 40s or 50s or 60s, it might be your 30s and 40s. So we want to make sure that we can find people when they, when what in their 30s is an important period of risk. So that can really help us change how we screen. So that's one example. And whether we do it earlier than 30, I don't think so. I mean, I think 30 is about the right time. It may be at some point down the road that we would look sooner if we actually really knew how to screen. But it's also important to know that if you're thinking about having kids and you have a strong family history, it's important to know if you have a genetic mutation, because in most states you can actually, if you want, pick eggs that don't carry the mutation on. That's, I mean, it's called, you can get genetic testing for the embryos and pick the ones that don't have the gene mutation if you want. You don't have to do it. It's something you can do.
And Wisdom is still mostly, we're thinking about women and kind of the general population. So we've moved to 30, where no one's really thinking about screening yet, but we're doing risk assessment. There are women probably in their 20s who might consider genetic testing if they have extremely strong family history of very unusual cancers.
Or they know there's a
Or they
mutation
know
in the family.
somebody in their family has a mutation, for example. So that it's not to say that no one should get tested before 30. It's just to say we don't think that that's right yet for kind of a general population screening. I mean, even moving it to the 30s is, let's say,
Controversial.
yeah, a new
It's a new
rise.
thing for testing. Okay, go to the next profile. Okay, so this is the 35-year-old Hannah who learned about the wisdom study from her physician. Her mother was diagnosed with breast cancer at age 75, which is the most common age to get it. It's not necessarily genetic, but she wanted to learn more about it. She's Asian. She didn't have any mutations. She had a very low polygenic risk. She has not had a mammogram and she had no history of a biopsy. And we found her to be actually pretty low risk. And at this point, we would say she doesn't need to be screened at this time. And, we would continue to check, things can change. Another family member could get cancer, something else could change. We could learn something new. But this is someone who probably won't get screened until her mid to late 40s or starting at 50, probably. So that's how you can use this kind of risk assessment, if that's helpful. And maybe we'll do one more and then see what other questions we have. Okay. Now we have Maria, who says her genetic testing isn't covered by her insurance, but she wanted to learn more about her risk. This is an example of someone who doesn't know anything about her family. She's a journalist. She lives in Miami. And she actually was found to have a CHEK2 mutation. And I think this will be good for Elad and Yue to talk a little bit about that. But she doesn't have the super high risk genes, but she does have a gene that gives her some increased risk. And that timing of risk is not usually in the 30s, but probably starting at 40, we would recommend that she would get screened every year. But there are things that she could do. People who have CHEK2 mutations are most likely to get slow-growing hormone-positive cancers. And those are things that for which, very low dose tamoxifen or baby Tam might actually drop her risk in half. And at the end of the day, it's always better to prevent disease than to find it or screen for it. So it's not something you have to do. Prevention isn't something you have to do, but it's something that you can do. So these are the kinds of things that we think that we can really help with and help people make better decisions. Elad, do you want to talk a little bit more about
Two things I would say about her. One is, so for CHEK2, women who have a CHEK2 mutation, not all CHEK2 mutations are considered the same. I don't know which one she has, but our breast health specialists would know and be able to tell her, because some of them are really, increase your risk twofold or above the general population. And some of them really only increase your risk about 1.5-fold the general population risk. And we treat those a little bit differently. The other thing I would say for her is something that we would like to implement, and we haven't done it yet, but we would like to do, is to also give her polygenic risk added to the CHEK2, essentially. I mean, the breast health specialists are able to kind of do that in an informal sense. And polygenic risk is very helpful, but I think as we move forward in the wisdom trial, we would like to essentially, for every woman who's a CHEK2 or ATM carrier, to give her a more precise polygenic risk plus CHEK2 or plus ATM risk. And I think that would help us kind of be a little bit more precise about when to start screening for these women and how often to screen.
Danielle, I want to answer your question. You fall into the risk category that Alad was talking about, you know, you had a mother and a maternal grandmother who died of breast cancer in their 30s. We especially are worried about that kind of a family history. So, you know, that's someone, even though if that's true, they must have been diagnosed in their early 30s. That's someone who we would probably say, gosh, this is a test that you can get and you can find out about. So we want people to know about it. And you indeed turned out to be a BRCA2 carrier, right? And so those are things that, you know, I'm glad to see that you got through it all, and you're still here to tell the tale. But that's the kind of thing that we want to really help people understand their risk. And, you know, we are also trying to find out at the 30s, right, Iwei and Alad, you know, are there, besides the mutations, are there other things, you know, that are in African American women? What makes them more likely to have triple negative breast cancers? What are the other risk factors? We've recently learned that having fibroids at a young age increases the risk for um, uh, having premenopausal breast cancer. And fibroids are extremely common in Black women. And there may be some interventions to that anti-progestin, so the opposite of progesterone, both make your fibroids go away and might be anti-cancer. These are the kinds of things and clues that we're looking for to try and figure out how we can make it better. Wow. All right. Our time is nearly up. Maybe I'll let Iwe and Alad again just say sort of what they're most excited about. And again, I'm so appreciative that everyone's joined us, and we hope this has been informative and useful. Iwe, final comments?
Yeah, I mean, I typed into the chat, but I reiterated here that I'm most excited for extending the, risk assessment age to 30. And as has been mentioned, we're, that offers opportunity to help lots of people, but also I think it's for as in terms of the science, it's a really opportunity to kind of push the boundary and challenge ourselves and really think about in this kind of uncharted water of how to do best for this age group. Kind of design a risk assessment algorithm that we think fits the best for this group. And so yeah, we're really happy that we have the chance to be able to study this very important topic.
Yeah, and Laura Crandon said that she thinks that's why the guidelines have to change. Well, Laura, that's why we're doing the wisdom study. So tell everybody you know to join the wisdom study and help us gather the data so we can change the guidelines. Alad, last comments.
Well, I'm super excited also about our plans to incorporate the mammographic AI. I think the combination of mammographic AI and polygenic risk scores and sequencing for the BRCA1, BRCA2, and PALB2s will be really important for a lot of women. I think we're going to make huge strides in understanding who's at risk and how to intervene.
And I am super excited to make sure that we can continue to advance the ways in which we can assess risk and be gathering the data to help inform how we can continue to do better. We'll have some data to present towards the end of the year, and I think we're going to be surprised by how well we can do at finding the people at highest risk. And that's not only good to help, and it's not such a huge group, but it is also true that there's a lot of people who have extremely low risk. And if we really start to learn and have confidence that we don't have to do so much for the people at lowest risk, we can really also reduce the burden of screening. It's very unpleasant to have to be called back and have things, biopsied. It's very scary. And, we don't always have, I'm just excited that risk can be so informative. That we can continue to learn how to use it better, find ways to work on prevention and, do what is best for each individual based on their risk. I think the future is really very bright indeed. And I'm especially grateful for the Wisdom team, for Alad and Iwe and everybody else and Steph and Allison. So it really takes a village. And without everybody working so hard, none of this would happen. And, it's very, very wonderful to have such great colleagues and people so passionate about making a difference. So I hope this was helpful. Let us know what you think.
Thank you so much, Laura. Thank you, Elad. Thank you, Iwe. This is a fantastic conversation. I love the fireside chat style of this, less formal, and gives everyone in the audience a chance to ask their questions. And I appreciate our scientists' passions and continued dedication to this project. It's awesome. And I've been on the study team and a participant for 6 years, and I'm just going to keep going, keep growing with wisdom. So thanks, everyone. Complete the little survey that you got in the chat. Let us know what you want to learn about next. We've got awesome programming coming up for the next several months. We've got Haley Brown talking about the Black Breast Cancer Alliance and Love My Girls next month on August 25th. They are doing research in Africa, and they're going to be telling us about the research and their goals for that project. We've got Connie Lehman from Clarity AI talking at the end of September 29th. She's going to be talking about their mammographic AI tool that was just FDA cleared, and the partnership that we're working on with her company to integrate that technology into our risk assessment. We've got the Light Collective, Andrea Downing, coming to us at the end of October to talk about their program in patient privacy around AI and other health technologies, how they're working so hard to bring patient voices and patients' rights to the field of AI as regulations and policies are being developed so that we are protected as the field unfolds. And we want to know what else you want to learn about. We're thinking about doing epigenetics and cancer risk in the late fall, early winter. So send us your feedback and we will find subject matter experts to come talk to us about your interests.
Okay, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you next month.